Dr. Jackson, what do you think caused the reason why this paper won? What's unique about it? It's very unique to me, and all is new to me, but what made the Academy accept this paper? And what is it, how is it an award-winning paper?
I think it was award-winning because, remember, I talked about how difficult it was. This was truly a multidisciplinary paper. And I think, now this journal is more in the world of business. I think it was, first of all, the uniqueness of it, but also you have perspectives from these two disciplines that usually aren't together, psychology and accounting. And I would also say that both of the psychologists, our training is very similar, Dr. Chang and myself. We're both trained in animal behavior, and we're both trained in learning and memory. That's why I brought her. She's junior faculty on. So you're not talking about clinical psychologists or social psychologists or industrial psychologists, because industrial psychologists, they're probably the closest to business. But here you had research psychologists. Dr. Chang works with fractals and also primates, monkeys in a zoo setting. I work with insects and termites. So I think that's what really made us stand out was the uniqueness of the paper and also truly multidisciplinary.
Dr. Jackson, how did you get interested? How did you become interested in insects?
Okay, I'll try to make a long story short. When I was 7 years old, I decided either I was going to study animals, study dinosaurs, or study the stars. And my father, who was highly educated, he said, well, either you want to be a paleontologist, a zoologist, or astronomer. So he told me these new big words, I was just 7 years old. Like I said, my father was highly educated. And I decided at 8, I said, if I'm going to study the stars, remember I'm only 8 years old, I'm going to have to stay up all night. And I said, if I study dinosaurs, I might not ever find any. But animals all around. So I had planned, and I grew up in Chicago, but we had a backyard, a big backyard for Chicago standards. It'd be small for Atlanta standards. We had flowers and grass and this and that. So I would study the insects. Now, I still would look at the stars at night when I was young. But I would look at insects, but I hadn't really planned on dealing with insects I didn't consider insects as animals. I thought growing up in Chicago, but then going into the woods in the Midwest, I had planned to study animals that lived in the woods, foxes, wolves, bears, deer, those kind of woodland animals. But insects were always interesting. I read about them. They fascinated me. In fact, even when I was in Vietnam, a soldier in Vietnam, and I was part of military intelligence, believe it or not, people thought it was crazy. On the day off, since we were intelligence, we got a day off in Vietnam, believe it or not, except when it really got critical. I would take my butterfly net and M16. I'd have a butterfly net and M16, and we'd catch insects. But it was just a hobby. So then when I came back to Morehouse to finish. I went to Morehouse for 2 years, left, and said I got to take a break from school, but knew I was coming back. So when I came back, and at first I majored in zoology, biology, but biology was geared for people who want to be medical doctors. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a body mechanic. And I took psychology and found out about this area called animal behavior. And that's it. That's what I want. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to study animals. I wanted to be a scientist that studied animals. I thought I was a zoologist, but I was more interested in behavior. So I switched to psychology, but still minored in biology. In fact, my master's degree is in biological psychology. My PhD is in comparative psychology, behavior genetics, with a minor in zoology and a minor in entomology. So I still had that biology. I'm very close. But I always consider myself a hybrid. 60% psychologist, 40% biologist. But, so when I went and at Morehouse, I did a research project on praying mantis and on imprinting and ducks. You only had to do one, but I was showing off. I did two. And when I went to graduate school, a professor knew I worked with insects, so he said, why don't you do insects? So I said, well, okay, I'll get my I got accepted in PhD program. I said, I'll do my master's with insects and then move on to mammals. And when I was in graduate school at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, this professor came to me and said, look, graduate school is tough, especially University of Illinois. If you really know something, that's the animal you need to stay with. And so it was really graduate school that made it where I decided to stick with insects. Because when I went into the lab, because since insects were a hobby, I knew more about insects than a lot of the graduate students did. I mean, they knew the research, but I just knew insects. So that's how I got with insects. And, I feel fortunate. I knew what I wanted to do when I was 8 years old.
Wow. But
I just didn't know what it was called. And I didn't know which animal it would be. But I knew I'd be a scientist working with animals.
Wow, that's interesting. And you've incorporated this with the Atlanta Zoo, and you've included this in your children's, our community children.
Right. And something else I can add too. I was part of the Center for Behavioral Neuroscience. This was a program that was for 10 years. And it was at Morehouse, Spelman, Emory, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. And one of the programs they had now, the grant is over now, but one of the programs they had that still exists is training teachers K through 12. And for the past, 5 or 6 summers, I go in one day for about 3 hours, and I work with teachers K through 12 on using insects to teach science. So, I've done that too. But insects, I was at the zoo, I was curator of invertebrates at Zoo Atlanta, part-time. Now I'm on the board with the zoo. But, it's going, even with the children's book, that it's 2 things I'm working on now. Well, I finished the children's book, the manuscript, All Ants Don't Live in Holes. It's for children 4 to 7. And the other project, paper I'm working on, and hopefully we'll have the manuscript finished in the next 2 or 3 weeks, is termites' reaction to light. Termites' reaction to light. Probably say, what's the big deal about that? Well, one thing is, termites, the workers, and that's what I'm working with, are blind. But yet they can detect light. We're not sure how. There's been a couple of papers to demonstrate this with not the same species that I'm working with, kind of distant relatives. I'm working with subterranean termites. This was found with drywood termites. So I'm just seeing if this phenomena is in more than one particular type of termite, and I'm finding out it is. And you probably say, well, but what's good about that? If they're avoiding light. Well, 2 things. One is, it fascinates me as a scientist, and others is, how are they detecting the light? And why would they want to avoid light? But the other thing from a practical standpoint is that if termites are avoiding light, that may be used as a non-toxic control for termites. In vision, I was talking to a friend of mine who's in physics, and I don't know, he's always thinking about how to make money. His name is Dr. Willie Rockwood. And what he envisioned was, see, right now, this paper's coming out because we just dealt with fluorescent light. But right now, we're collecting data. In fact, we were doing it as I speak. My students now are looking at termites' reaction to light at different wavelengths, different colors of light, from blue all the way to red. But what he envisioned is that, imagine something looks like a fishnet, and you've got little lights in there, in this little fishnet, and you plant this, and this fishnet is about 6 feet, but it's real thin wire. You got little lights in there. You plant this around your house. And, okay, you plant it around your house, so it's 6 feet down. You got the little lights in there, and the lights are going to be energized by photocells. And that way you're creating a light barrier around your house. And the reason we're doing it at different wavelengths is to see, at some wavelengths do they avoid it more than others.